All right, guys, so now we're going to get into some back-end web development. Actually, I should say full stack because we are going to create a front end to this as well in the next section. But this is stuff that you wouldn't normally find in a regular JavaScript course. So you can kind of think of this as a bonus project for the course. If you feel like you're not ready to jump into Node and Express and building APIs and stuff, then you could always put this project on hold. You know, you don't have to just jump into a course and just finish it straight to the end. There's all types of ways that you can take courses. So if you feel like you want to go back and learn some, get more into just JavaScript fundamentals and stuff, and then you want to come back, that's absolutely fine. All right, so with that said, we're going to be using Express for our web framework on the back end. And what this does is it makes creating APIs much easier than if you were to just use like the core modules, the core HTTP module that we looked at in the last video. Okay, it's built on top of that, but it adds a whole bunch of stuff to make things easier for creating routes and so on. So expressjs.com is where you can find all the documentation, so routing, middleware, all kinds of stuff. If you go to getting started, you'll see that we're going to start just like we would any other project using Node. We're going to initialize a package.json. We want to install Express, etc. All right, so you can kind of use the documentation as a supplement if you want. So what I've done is I've created a folder called Random Ideas API. Okay, because in this section, we're just creating the back end. We're just creating the API, which are the routes that we can make HTTP requests to get ideas, create, read, update, and delete ideas. And then in the next section, we'll add a front end, and then it will become a full stack app. All right, so I'm going to open up my terminal because we do need to use this quite a bit. We need to initialize a package.json. So let's do that first. I'm going to say npm init, and I'm just going to go through these. So package name, I'm just going to call it random ideas, and then version 1.00, that's fine. Description, we'll say idea sharing app. Entry point, I'm actually going to make it server.js. Usually when I create a full stack application, the backend main entry point I like to call server.js, but it's up to you. Let's see, so author, you can put your own name in if you want, and I'm going to make this an MIT license. All right, so now we have our package.json. So the next thing we want to do is install Express. We don't want to install it as a dev dependency because it's something we'll use in production. Let me just fix this. I'm just going to update npm real quick. So npm at 9.4.0, just so we don't keep seeing that message. Okay, so now let's create our server.js, and this is our entry point. And what I'm going to do now is just create a very basic Express server just to get something up and running. So first thing we want to do is bring in Express. So we want to require that. And then the way that this works is we initialize a variable, usually called app, and we set that to Express. So now this variable will be an object that has all kinds of methods on it for creating routes and just creating our server itself. So to create the server, we simply say app.listen, just like we did with the HTTP module, and then we pass in a port. Now the port I'm actually going to put in a variable up here, so we'll say const port, and we're going to set that to 5000 for now. So what this listen method takes in is a port number, and then if you want to do something like a console log, we can pass in a function. So let's say console log, and we'll say server listening on port, and let's actually make these backticks so that we can put the port number in there. So that way we can say, yeah, on port, and then use our money sign syntax and pass in the port variable. All right, so just that, we should be able to start it up, but let's create a simple route. So to create routes, Remember, when we just used the HTTP module, we had to do all kind of if statements or create a switch. Here, we simply say app dot, and then the method, so get, post, put, delete, whatever type of route. I'm going to make this a get request. And for now, we'll just make it to just slash, just the index. And then we pass in a callback here, and this is always going to take in a request and response object. We saw this with the HTTP module, but it wasn't per route. It was per like any request to the server. So every route we have a request and response object. And what I'm going to do is just send back some text. So I'll say res, that's the response object, and it has a method called send, and we can send whatever we want back. In this case, let's just say hello world. So now we have a simple route to just slash, and we should get back hello world. Now to run our server, we need to run the file. So let's go to our package.json and let's create a start script and get rid of this. And what that's going to run is node and then the name of our file, which is server or server.js. So now we should be able to come down into our terminal and say npm start, and you can see server listening on port 5000. So I'm going to go to Postman. You can also use your browser if you want, because it is a GET request. But I'd encourage you to get in the habit of using Postman or something like it. So let's say HTTP. Yeah, we're going to go to localhost 5000 and send. We get back a response of 200, and we have the text of hello world. Okay, and then in our headers we have like the content type is text HTML because we just use send and sent to string. If we send JSON, so for example, if I do send and then I'll have an object here and we'll say message and set that to hello world. And then let's just restart the server. Okay, and then if I go back to, where is it, Postman, and I send that again, notice that the content type is automatically application/JSON. So I didn't have to specify that like we did with the HTTP module. I didn't even have to turn it into JSON. I didn't have to do JSON.stringify. I just took a simple JavaScript object and passed it into .send. Now we also have a method called .json, which basically does the same thing. It just expects JSON. So if we restart, we can go back to Postman, send, and you see we get application JSON for the content type. If we look in the body, we see our JSON response from our server. Now let's send back some data that's a little more realistic. So I'm actually going to just grab an array of idea objects and paste them in. Ultimately, I'm actually going to show you how we can set up a database, MongoDB database, and send and have this data come from there. But for now, I'm just going to paste them in. So I'll go right here. And if you want to grab these from the final project, you can, or if you want to copy them or create your own. So I just have a variable of ideas. It's an array, and each one has an ID, a text field, which is the idea, and then a tag, a username, and then a date. And we're not going to be implementing any kind of authentication, but what we will do is in the front end, when you add an idea, you'll have a username field, just so you can differentiate whose idea is whose. And then once you add it once, it'll get saved into local storage so that when you go to add another idea, that username field is pre-filled. All right, and then we can make it so only the person with that username can delete items. Now, obviously, that's not something you would do in a real production application, because anyone could put that username in, but it gives you an idea of how this works. We're just missing the authentication part, which is just way beyond anything that should be in this type of course. But yeah, so these are the ideas, and I'm just using superhero names for usernames. And I want to return this from not slash. For slash, we'll just do like, you don't have to do anything, but we'll just say welcome to the random ideas API. If someone goes to that, okay, makes a request to that. What I want this to be, these ideas, is a get request to /API/ideas. So we're going to keep this in a RESTful structure, meaning when we get ideas, we make a get request to ideas. When we create an idea, we make a post request to ideas. When we delete, we make a delete request to ideas/whatever ID. And then when we make a put request to update, we make a put request to ideas/ID. So that's just the common, REST structure of endpoints. So all I'm going to do here is say res.json, and I could just send the ideas like this. But what I like to do is send an object that has a success, and we'll set that to true, and then data, which I'll set to ideas. So now if we go ahead and restart the server and we go back to Postman and we send a request, well, that's to the root. Let's go /API/ideas and send that, and we get back an object with success true, and then in data we have the array of ideas, which is what we want. All right, now before we end this video, I also want to have a route to get a single idea using the ID. So this one is to, let's say, get all ideas, and then let's copy this down and let's go API/ideas, and then it's going to be an ID, like /1, we get that, the one with the ID of 1. So the way we do this is we use a query param, and those are going to start with colon. So I'm going to say :ID. And then the way that we can access that in here is with the request object. We can say request.params, and then whatever param we want, such as ID. All right, so right now, let's just actually, what should I do here just to display this? Let's actually respond with that. So for data, I'm just going to respond with request params ID just to show you how this works. So now if I restart the server and we come over here and we say get ideas /1 and I send, you'll see for data I'm getting 1. If I do this number 1100, then I'm going to get that in data. So we're able to access that. Now we just want to filter the idea by the ID. Now when we start getting into databases, it's actually easier because we can just use a method like find by ID. But in this case, we have to manually do it, and excuse me, we can do that with a high order array method of find. So let's go up here and let's say const idea, set that to ideas.find, and this will basically loop through each one. So we want to have a function here and say for each idea, then I want to say where the idea.id is equal to the request.params ID. Now, as you can see in my IDs, these are numbers, so they're not strings, they're numbers. So I'm going to parse the request param that comes in, because that's a string. I'm going to parse it as a number by just putting a plus sign here. And then we'll say request.params.id. Okay, so that should get the idea that has this, whatever ID is passed in. Okay, now as far as handling an error, like let's say that there is no idea with that ID, we need to take care of that. So we'll say if, and let's say if no idea, then I'm gonna respond, but I don't want to send to 200 because that means that's success. So we can actually do status, and that would be not found, so we'll say 404. And then we can tack on our JSON and then pass in whatever we want. In this case, we're going to say success, false, and then we'll put an error, and I'm going to say resource not found. Okay. Else, actually, we don't even need to do an else. What we can do is just return that and then just leave this as is. But of course, we want to, in our data, we want to send the idea. All right, so let's try that. We're going to restart the server. And let's jump into Postman. And let's keep the 1 here and send. And we get back in our data an object with the idea of of 1. Okay, if I do 2, we get 2. If I do 5, which there isn't one, notice I get a 404 not found, and I get success false, and the error is resource not found. All right, so we have an API now that serves us ideas. So what I want to do next is a couple things. One, resetting the server every time we make a change is kind of a pain in the neck. So we're going to install something called NodeMon that will constantly watch the server for changes. And then also, you shouldn't put all your routes in the server.js file. That just kind of clutters things up. And we have the data in here and everything. We want this file to be nice and clean. So what we can do is create separate files for our routes using the Express router. So we're going to do that next.